on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. Massive program tonight. We cover everything from Extinction Rebellion nupties being locked up to Donald Trump putting Kevin Rudd in his place. Joining me tonight is the great Douglas Murray on the rise of Islamism in Europe and why South Africa is such an unholy mess. Army Horowitz on the latest US news, and a young man who is the anti-Greta Thunberg, if you ask me, a sane, rational voice speaking sense and encouraging Australians to think critically about climate change and energy. Will Shackel will join me shortly, and he delivers a fact check to Simon Holmes' Court. Also later in the hour, lefties losing it, including this trans activist threatening to ruin reputations.
Don't be transphobic to me. You have no idea what sort of social status I have. I could ruin your whole reputation. I could ruin this whole hostel.
But first, let's go over the day's top stories with Sky News contributor Gary Hardgrave. Gary, let's start with the Miles government in Queensland. Steven Giggles Miles and Labor are emphatic. They're denying they sought advice on whether they should cancel the 2032 Brisbane Olympic Games. Media reports suggest that they privately raised the question after there was that great public backlash over the cost of the project. But a spokeswoman from the Miles office has said the government has never sought advice about cancelling the Games. We've always said Queensland would deliver a great Games. Not once did the government ever have an intention to cancel the Games. Well, there you go. Are you buying this explanation, Gary?
I'm not sure many Queenslanders are, Rita. Great to be with you. I think a lot of us in Queensland actually wanted to get on with it. You see, 1 July next year is the end of the early mark. Brisbane was announced over 1,000 days ago as the host for 2032, and nothing's been done. There's no plan. There was this fight over the Gabba and ruining a heritage-listed school and 18 other buildings in the central city. But a lot of us who live in Brisbane want to know how we get around the city. And the plan was always about sort of 2045, where the infrastructure we're going to need as a growing Brisbane becomes 8 million people in the great southeast corner over the next 20 or so years. How were we going to manage that growth? The Olympics was going to be the vehicle. There's nothing. There's just absolutely no announcements, no plan, nothing concrete, pardon the pun, of any description about infrastructure. So a lot of us are planning where we're going to be during 2032. We're going to get the heck out of town. And of course now Steven Miles has said, I've got this great idea. John Coates told me, just use existing infrastructure. So he's gone to a stadium which was built 46 years ago, which is the old QE2 stadium. Rita, when I was in high school, I went to the opening day when Her Majesty drove around on the car. One of my, I was one of the local high school students. We went up there to wave to Her Majesty as she drove around to open up the QE2 stadium, which is now apparently, that was 1977, now apparently going to be the venue for the 2032 Olympics. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. But I actually think the Miles government is making the stuff up, if you get what I mean. There's no doubt in my mind they have lost all interest,
get what you mean.
all direction, all ideas. Yeah.
Well, I think maybe they're counting that they don't have to worry about this because we've got a state election coming in October, and I think perhaps this will become someone else's problem.
Well, these things can become career ruiners. And the problem for David Crisafulli, if he was to win the election, is building anything in Queensland relies on a deal with the CFMEU. And the price of everything has just gone up, in some cases doubled. Not just the cost of labour, but the cost of material, the cost of building projects has gone out twice the length. And so private sector people are now borrowing more money to build less in a slower way, and it's becoming uneconomical to build anything here. Heaven help us when they say, if you want it built, this is the deal. We've got a real problem ahead of us, and unless we sort out the CFMEU and its impact on building and the future of Queensland, I don't know how these games are actually going to be built.
Well, we've got similar issues right here in Victoria, and we learned today that the Victorian government perhaps fudged their figures for the 2026 Commonwealth Games when they tried to explain their way out of hosting it. They quoted almost $7 billion where the state's auditor has found it was actually $4.9 billion. What's a few billion between friends? The auditor said the government's figures were overstated. I'm shocked that Dan Andrews is bad with numbers. Who could have imagined that? Now let's go to the front page of today's Herald Sun. Fossil Fools, a fantastic front page there. The story is about Violet Coco and Bradley Homewood, who have just seen their jail terms almost tripled after their appeal to cut their sentences backfired. They were the two Extinction Rebellion climate protesters who blocked Melbourne's Westgate Bridge, causing traffic chaos so bad that it forced a woman to give birth on the side of a freeway. Judge David Sexton has added 2 months to their 3-week sentences, insisting the fact is that each of you deliberately, flagrantly broke the law and committed crimes of some significance. Your sustained obstruction of emergency workers was not appropriate and must be denounced. A message must be sent to like-minded people not to engage in this type of illegality. This is fantastic development. Finally, a sentence that reflects community expectations, Gary.
Yeah, good on the judge, and he should be backed in, and so should his colleagues back him in. I mean, now that a precedent's been set, we've got to look very closely at the impact of these people. The people on the left, the woke left, the ones who believe that they're morally and intellectually superior to any of us, anybody else. I mean, we're all mad if we don't agree with them. They've got to be put into some sort of frame. They have to be accountable for their actions. The hurt, the expense, the cost to the economy, the way in which they concrete their arms inside things and chain themselves between posts and slow down traffic. It's happened all over the world, but it's become a trend that now is causing enormous distress to emergency service workers who want to clean it up, but of course, you know, they've got rights to protest and all that stuff. Well, hang on, what about the people who've got rights to move around? So I think they should actually put an economic penalty associated with whatever those protests are and say, if you want to pay the penalty, maybe you can have a protest. If you don't, then shut up, go to a forum, buy an old box from a fruit and grocery shop and stand on it and yell in the park like he used to 100 years ago. There's a way of protesting, Rita, but blocking traffic and ruining other people's lives isn't the answer.
Absolutely. The right to protest is fundamental, but that does not extend to blocking roads and supergluing yourself to buildings and all the other shenanigans they get up to. Now, it must be a day ending in Y, because The Guardian is losing it. More lefties losing it because Liberal Senator Alex Antic has taken the top spot on the Liberal Party's South Australian ticket. They've accused him of perpetuating the Liberal Party's women's problem by knocking Anne Ruston off the top spot. She's now number 2. And Gary, they're trying to smear him as a nice guy turned Trumpian. The ABC also, I saw Patricia Karvelis posting about this, saying the SA's most senior female Liberal has lost a fight with a hard right, Alex Antic. I mean, if Alex Antic is hard right, goodness me. But at the end of the day, Gary, Antic is the future of the Liberal Party. If you want people in there who are clear-eyed, who are principled, who are effective politicians, who stand up for Liberal values, then you want more Alex Antics in there, not less.
Yeah, look, I think it's important to stand for the stuff. Remember the people who brought you there. Alex Antic certainly embodies that. And Anne Ruston, I like Anne Ruston enormously. I think she's a great contributor. And if she loosens her shackles away from the Simon Birmingham type influence in the South Australian influence, she'll probably do very well. But look, Alex and Anne are both going to get elected. So I don't understand the point here. I mean, it's just down to numbers. And Alex Antic obviously has galvanised a support base that Anne Ruston hasn't. But people like Anne, and she is a contributor. She's a shadow minister. So, you know, they both have a strong future and they're both going to be there into the future. And good on South Australia for returning them both. So I say nothing to see here myself.
Now, former President Donald Trump sat down with GB News' Nigel Farage for an exclusive interview we aired it earlier tonight. He had some choice words to say about Australia's ambassador to the US, Kevin Rudd.
Kevin Rudd, former Labour MP. I mean, he has said the most horrible things. You were a destructive president, a traitor to the West. And he's now Australia's ambassador in Washington.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
Would you take a phone call from him?
He won't be there long if that's the case. I don't know much about him. I heard he was a little bit nasty. I hear he's not the brightest bulb, but I don't know much about him. But if he's at all hostile, he will not be there long.
Not the brightest bulb. Kevin Rudd has already tried backpedaling on his anti-Trump comments. Have a listen.
My comments in the past have been those of an independent think tanker. I haven't done them as the Australian ambassador to the United States. And frankly, in this country as independent think tanker, people expect you to exercise a wide latitude of engagement in the public policy debate. And I certainly did so, as have, I think, most people who have run think tanks in this country.
Oh, Gary, he was just a think tanker back then. It doesn't count. I mean, Trump has a long memory for these kinds of comments. And it's not just Kevin Rudd who is in a bit of trouble here. We've got Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill, who called Trump's son a big baby. Indigenous Australians Minister Linda Burney used Trump's name as a slur against no campaigners during the referendum. A number of other ministers and MPs have also really posted stupid comments online, all trying to, I don't know, appeal to the Twitter set. But now we've got Trump heading back into the White House. All the polls are telling us that. And these ministers and MPs may have undermined our relationship with our biggest ally.
Look, Rita, it's what, 34 and a half years since I first met Kevin Rudd. And I was left with no doubt that he thought I was just bloody lucky to have met him. He is, there's no doubt in my mind, a bloke who doesn't lack confidence, that he has a view that he's the smartest bloke in any room that he walks into. And I had to take a double take when he said think tanker, because I thought he said something else, which is what most people think he probably is. So I think Donald Trump's got him well and truly marked. I thought his appointment was actually going to breach our AUKUS and ANZUS arrangements, but so far he hasn't. But if there's a change, and I hope there is, because Trump will bring some stability to an unstable world, Kevin Rudd may well be looking to go back to being a think tanker.
Gary Hardgrave, thank you so much for your time this evening. Joining me now is Year 12 student and founder of Nuclear for Australia, Will Shackel. Now, Will, you got into a bit of a Twitter spat with left-wing climate change activist and son of Australia's first billionaire, Simon Holmes à Court, when you said that Australia is the only G20 country with a nuclear ban. This prompted the Till backer, Holmes à Court, to write, Will Shackel, why do you keep saying Australia is the only country in the G20 that has banned nuclear? Germany and Italy are in the G20. Both have banned nuclear. The EU is in the G20. Multiple EU members have banned nuclear. Oh dear, he seems a bit upset there. But Will, I wonder whether Simon should have done a bit more Googling before trying to fact check you, because you set him straight about Italy, Germany and the EU. So tell us, do they have nuclear bans?
Well, yes, it is a fact that Australia is the only member of the G20 with a ban on nuclear power. To go into the specifics, Germany currently has just shut down their reactors. They're not allowed to build new reactors, but they could easily switch on the reactors that they currently have. And there's huge efforts in Germany at the moment to do that because they are suffering with high energy bills and, of course, a disastrous record on acting on climate change. And then when you look at Italy, Italy actually has never had a ban on nuclear power. They had 2 referendums where the people actually voted down nuclear power. So that's not a nuclear power ban. But, you know, if Simon is serious about supporting our efforts to legalise nuclear power, then he should be serious about it and not misrepresent what I say to all of his followers.
Now, which countries are doing the best when it comes to nuclear power? Give us the straight data.
Well, I think probably the best example is in terms of France, where they're powered by 70% nuclear power, and they've been able to, you know, use nuclear power for decades to become one of the lowest, you know, have one of the lowest greenhouse gas emissions footprints of any country in Europe, and at the same time have the lowest power price, some of the lowest power prices in all of Europe. But I think the really important thing is that if Australia was to lift the bans on nuclear power, we could be one of the strongest countries when it comes to nuclear power around the world. We're uniquely positioned to benefit from nuclear power. We have the largest uranium reserves in the world, and already we're a nuclear nation. We have a research reactor 40 kilometres from the Sydney CBD, which is providing medical isotopes for people to help treat cancer. And we export advanced manufactured items around the world using that reactor and using nuclear science. So we are respected around the world for our nuclear science capabilities. And if we were to embrace nuclear power, there is no doubt in my mind that we would be one of the world leaders when it came to nuclear power generation.
And we sit on the world's largest reserves of uranium. So that's just another plus that we're neglecting. The coalition under Peter Dutton is committing to establishing nuclear power. That's what they tell us. Peter Dutton has floated the idea of building nuclear power stations on old coal station sites. How do you think this policy will be received by Australians, and particularly by youngsters who are very much concerned about climate change?
Well, I think it will. Obviously, no one knows the details of their specific policy, but I think Australians in general support nuclear power. We were able to see that in the recent news poll, which actually showed that in addition to voters from every single party, whether it's Liberals, Labor or the Greens, supporting a plan for small modular reactors to replace coal-fired power stations, in addition to that, 2/3 of my generation also supported that proposal. So when you look around, you know, even when I was on Q&A last year, a majority of their audience also supported nuclear power. So it's abundantly clear that there is a social licence for nuclear power in Australia. And the first step should be to lift the bans on nuclear power. So at very, very least, we can consider it as an option in our energy mix. And that is certainly something that all Australians inherently support.
Look, if we're going to head to net zero, I don't even see this as a negotiable. We have to have nuclear, otherwise our living standards are going to plummet. How are we going to have reliable baseload power? You can't have that renewables. Does your generation, which is the most environmentally active, if you want to use a nice term, do they still support net zero if it means a dramatic change to the living standards, all the comforts that they're accustomed to, or is it very much dependent on having everything remain as it is, just with lower emissions?
Look, I'll be very frank with you, Rita. I think there's an expectation among young people, and probably a false expectation, that if we were to pursue a 100% renewable plan, something which has never been successfully done around the world, that we would still be able to maintain our living standards and perhaps even, you know, have better living standards. But when you look at the evidence, no nation has been able to decarbonise without using lots of nuclear or lots of hydro. Australia is basically a guinea pig in this 100% renewables plan. I support renewables, but at the same time, like most Australians, say that we should also be able to consider the potential role for nuclear power as part of our mix. And that's not a hard ask. But currently, because of the legal prohibitions at both the federal and also state level, we are not able to even consider it. And like I said earlier, Australia is the only member in the G20 with such a policy, despite Australia being so uniquely positioned to harness the benefits of nuclear power. So, you know, if we want to be able to maintain our living standards, to have an Australia where we're able to have energy security, where we're able to have, you know, the very, very basic certainty that the lights will stay on, that power prices will not continue to go up, and that we'll be able to reach net zero, then we must be considering the role of nuclear power.
Now, the Guardian, in typical fashion, is hysterical with the mere mention of the word nuclear. They've gone with this headline: Peter Dutton wanted a plebiscite on marriage equality. Why not hold another one on his nuclear fantasy. It's a fantasy, Will. Did you know that? I don't remember having a plebiscite about renewables or gas bans or closing down cheap, reliable sources of energy, but here we are. Why is there such hysteria and scaremongering around nuclear, especially when you look at countries like Sweden and France, where they are doing so well with nuclear, and they're actually providing a cheap, reliable, clean form of energy for their citizens?
Look, I think it's really counterproductive that we are entering into this scare campaign, and it's looking like the government is going to launch a scare campaign against nuclear power, which is just, in breach of the basic science. And around the world, people from all political parties, politicians have been able to support nuclear power, whether you look to the UK, where UK Labor supports it, to the Democrats even in the US, where they support it. Now, actually, Nuclear for Australia tomorrow will be launching a major campaign called Facts, Not Politics, where we want to be able to reset the debate, putting facts first and experts' opinions at the forefront of the debate. Because currently all we're seeing from politicians is really petty political point scoring and misinformation, misinformation fear campaigns. And that is not in the best interest of Australians, and certainly not in the best interest of future generations and younger generations like myself. So we'll be, as part of our team, we've got Dr. Adi Patterson, one of the leading nuclear experts in Australia, as well as Jasmine Diab, who has a background in nuclear science, and she actually studied nuclear engineering as a result of her concerns for climate change. So it's really important that as we see this fear campaign and misinformation campaign ramp up on nuclear power in ignorance of the science, that we are able to reposition the facts to be at the forefront of the debate.
Well done. I don't know where you get the time to do all this, Will, because you're doing year 12. My son's doing year 12, and I don't think you could be running a campaign like this as well. You've also launched a petition calling on decision makers to lift the nuclear ban. And how many signatures have you got at the moment? I'm going to put up the website here, so if people want to support you, they can go to nuclearforaustralia.com/petition. How many signatures are you looking for?
Well, currently it's well over 15,000, so thank you for everyone who's already signed that. We're looking for as many signatures as possible because we need to be able to show politicians that Australians are actually really serious about getting the bans on nuclear power lifted. So really, it's as many as possible. If people can sign, if they support the bans on nuclear power being lifted in Australia, I'd encourage them to sign at nuclearforaustralia.com/petition.
Well done, Will Shackel. Thank you so much for your time this evening. And still to come, the brilliant Douglas Murray on the rise of Islamism in Europe. And he tells us why South Africa is in such dire straits. And lefties losing it. Welcome back. Joining me now is international best-selling author of The War on the West, The Strange Death of Europe and The Madness of Crowds, Douglas Murray. We have a lot to discuss tonight, including the great Christopher Hitchens and the manner in which Islamism has been allowed to spread in Europe. But first, I want to speak to you about some of the lunacy we've seen right here in Melbourne with Extinction Rebellion protesters causing havoc. And Douglas, we're learning that these protests are not only mindless and disruptive, but they're dangerous too, with more than a dozen 000 emergency calls to police and 3 to paramedics delayed as a result of a recent protest here in Melbourne. You've written in The Spectator about how the hysterical and irrational are running the agenda, including the green fanatics of Extinction Rebellion.
Yes, I mean, it's the same across the developed world at the moment, Rita. Extinction Rebellion cause havoc wherever they go. They cause such havoc and seem to me to do such damage to the cause that they profess to care about, that you'd almost think that they were funded by the fossil fuel industry. I mean, they are so completely negative in what they push about. They disrupt the normal citizenry of our countries from going about our lives. They disrupt people going to their jobs. Very often you see these very privileged middle-class people stopping working-class people from getting to work. We can see a couple of examples of that in these pictures that are running at the moment, I would suggest. They cause damage, and they also have absolutely no sympathy for anyone else. And I've said before, it's the typical call of the fanatics across the age. It's not just that they behave like fanatics and look like fanatics and dress like fanatics. They have the central thing that fanatics have, which is it's my way or nothing. And they say whenever they're asked about things like, holding up ambulances, getting to hospital with sick people, and they say, well, the planet's burning, we're all dying. And you think, well, that's your claim. That doesn't mean it's true. And that doesn't mean you can just do anything you want in the meantime. But of course, they've whipped themselves into this place where they think they can do anything they like because everything is on the table. And as I say, that's fanatics across the centuries would have recognized these guys.
They're absolute mad ideologues, this lot. You've also written this week about free speech. You wrote in the Free Press about the right to offend and the late, great Christopher Hitchens, whose work is all the more relevant now, I would argue. He did try to warn us about so much of what's happening right now, including the growing Islamism in the West and the efforts to criminalise criticism as hate speech. I want to play you a clip from Hitch. This is from some 15 years ago.
Resist it while you still can, and before the right to complain is taken away from you, which will be the next thing, you will be told you can't complain because you're Islamophobic. The term is already being introduced into the culture as if it was an accusation of race hatred, for example, or bigotry, whereas it's only the objection to the preachings of a very extreme and absolutist religion. Watch out for these symptoms. They are not just symptoms of surrender, very often ecumenically offered to you by men of God in other robes, Christian and Jewish and smarmy ecumenical. These are the ones who hold open the gates for the barbarians. The barbarians never take a city till someone holds the gates open for them. And it's your own preachers who will do it for you, and your own multicultural authorities who will do it for you. Resist it while you can.
Resist it while you can, Douglas. What would Christopher Hitchens make of what is happening in the West right now?
I think it's exactly as he warned about there. The presence from Canada to Scotland to Australia of a sort of petty bureaucrat generally who believes that they can and should have the right to decide what you and I and everyone watching can say, think, and read. That what offends them or what they think might offend somebody else who they feel offended for on their behalf means that you shouldn't say something or think something or observe something. I'm afraid those petty bureaucrats have only grown in number in recent years. I think Christopher would maybe be slightly surprised by the fact that, less and less is it men in clerical robes making demands on our free speech, and more is it paper pushing functionaries, faceless bureaucrats who insist on pushing forward laws that anybody who has any knowledge of freedom, and specifically freedom of speech, would know would not work and should not work in a free society. As I say, every country at the moment in the developed West, it's all about clamping down on what the majority can say, and that's reminiscent not of our societies, that's reminiscent of totalitarian societies. The whole point of free societies is that we get things out in the open and we have them out there. And everything short of incitement is opinion, is view, is to be open to challenge, but not open to censure and simple silencing. And as I say, in country after country, that's the direction everything is going.
And we are seeing a lot of self-censorship because of that. And I guess this next clip might be an example of that. I want to play this. It's kind of almost light-hearted, but it's not. This is a man being chided for eating his lunch during Ramadan when many of his co-workers are fasting. Have a look.
Look at this kuffar. Everybody's on Ramadan.
I know, I actually feel bad for eating.
And this guy's,
I'm going to have to put this away, ain't I?
this guy's stuffing his face.
This
guy he just sat here stuffing his face.
Now, it may seem in good nature, but as Yasmin Mohammed, who shared that clip, pointed out, the more you appease, the more you empower. That man should have kept enjoying his pasta.
Yeah, of course. I mean, every difference in the world lies between my or your right to practice our religion, our faith, or otherwise, and us trying to insist that somebody else observe whatever we believe because we believe it. Everything that has grown up in the West on freedom of religion and freedom of thought is predicated on the idea that I can have my beliefs and you can have yours, and we're part of the same society. The moment that you change that pact and say, actually, I have my beliefs and therefore you cannot have yours, everything changes. And then it becomes effectively an intimidation game or a numbers game. And that's obviously what was going on in that clip. If it had been the other way round, though, Rita, I don't need to say this to you, if it had been the other way round and a group of, I don't know, English workers were sort of horrified that a Muslim co-worker wasn't eating and they made him eat, wow, the front pages would be held around the world. We'd all be told about the Islamophobic British and much more. People should just think on that. Which way round is it actually easiest at the moment to try to push around and intimidate people? And it's that way round, I'm afraid.
Well, yes, imagine if you had exactly that setting and someone was being mocked and called names for having a halal meal when everyone else was having, I don't know, pork chops. I mean, that would be an outrage. There would be sackings, there would be cancellations, there would be probably a hate crimes committed, the police would be investigating, but that is just laughed off and the poor guy went hungry.
There'd be a whole new unit of police officers put onto the case, Rita. Emergency investigation, full judge-led inquiry.
Now, I see you're in Perth. You have been in South Africa in recent days. That is a country that is facing all sorts of dire challenges, from an extreme energy crisis to crime rates, really. We don't sort of see in the West rape and murder rates put the country as the third most crime-riddled in the world. Douglas, is there any hope for South Africa? What did you learn while you were there? Are they headed to Zimbabwe 2.0?
Well, it's a fascinating country, of course, and it's an extraordinary country. I've been there before, but not for a few years. And it's a country so rich in resources, and I don't just mean, mineral resources and that sort of thing, but extraordinarily rich in what we rather unpleasantly call in our era human resources. They have an enormous amount of potential in South Africa, and it has been wasted by the government in recent years, which has been so corrupt. I mean, so unbelievably corrupt on a scale which it just boggles the mind. It's a sort of corruption of a sort of Middle Eastern level. That's how good the leadership are at that. All the time, of course, it's fascinating. They do. One of the things I found most interesting was, of course, South Africa's government's been grandstanding on the international stage in recent months by taking Israel to the International Court of Justice for a charge of genocide they couldn't hold up. And of course they couldn't, because it's not true. But it's very interesting, whenever any government does something totally grandiose like that, you can always tell they're going to distract you. They're trying to distract you and particularly their people from things they're not doing. I said to audiences in South Africa, it's that question of you should look at the hand that the magician has that you're not meant to be looking at. And in the case of the South African government, the ANC, corrupt ANC government, they've presided over a period not just of this corruption, but the lowest education standards in Africa. Which Somalis are better educated than South Africans. They've got more than 50% youth unemployment, which everywhere I go when I notice that sort of thing, it's just the biggest tragedy. Young men in particular just hanging around with nothing to do. It's unbelievable, appalling. Many of them have actually got degrees because they were told that was the way to do it, and they're in debt and they're unemployable because there aren't any jobs. These are the sorts of real world effects of misgoverning a country like the ANC has in recent years. There's an election coming up. It's not quite clear how it'll shake out, but I would hope that the South African public will vote for dramatic change of scene, because the ANC had so much goodwill in the 1990s in the country and internationally. And they've just spent it and spilt it in totally unforgivable ways.
And finally, I saw this piece in today's New York Post, a new poll from a non-profit think tank showing only 1 in 2 New Yorkers plans to stay in the city over the next 5 years. We've already seen an exodus from New York to places like Florida and Texas, and it seems many are still angry over quality of life issues, and that hasn't improved post-pandemic. Only 1 in 3 New Yorkers are happy in the Big Apple. You're a New Yorker. Are you planning your escape as we speak?
I'm not. I mean, I still love New York. I think it's one of the great cities in the world. But it really is something. It's something you and I have talked about before, Rita. But it really is astonishing to anyone who comes from outside the ways in which principally Democrat-run cities have been run into the ground. I've just finished some work on the fentanyl crisis in America, and you look at the drugs crisis in these Democrat cities, the sanctuary cities, the New Yorks and the Philadelphias and so on, and you see scenes there which genuinely shock people around the world. I was actually speaking to somebody in South Africa the other day who said that she had recently been to New York and was just appalled by what she saw. Because, for all of the challenges in South Africa, you don't see just zonked out, drug addicts just lying across the pavements everywhere. You don't see that. Goodness knows the country has its own problems, but it's a question that really the governor and the mayor of New York and others have to ask themselves, which is how did New Yorkers get it? How did it get to the stage where New Yorkers were expected to put up with some of the scenes that we're now expected to put up with? How did this become normal? Somebody said this to me in Philadelphia recently, watching somebody overdose in the streets. Just how on earth did this happen? This has got to stop, and it doesn't stop. It gets worse.
It does, and I think I played a clip earlier this week from New York of rats being roasted on the street. People were, I think, consuming rats. That's where we've got to there. Before I let you go, you are in Australia. I still think we could encourage you to perhaps consider living in Sydney, maybe Melbourne. What can people expect when they come to see you speak?
I'm very happily in Perth at the moment, which is a wonderful place to be. And yes, I'm looking forward to being in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. And yes, I'm doing each night a different theatre with the great Josh Zepps. And we're roaming very far and wide. We covered a lot of ground yesterday with a wonderful capacity audience here in Perth, who I stayed around and talked with afterwards. And yes, I'm apart from anything else, I'm very, very keen to know what's on top of Australian minds at the moment, because I know there's a lot going on here in Australia that's just like what's going on in the rest of the world. And you've got a couple of your own special little problems as well, it seems.
We do. I think you might be alarmed by how bad things are here right now, and there's a bit of apathy about it as well. Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time this evening.
It's a great pleasure as always, Rita. See you soon.
Still to come, lefties losing it and Amy Horowitz on Melania's comeback, and why an increasing number of Americans are saying, make America like Texas again. That's after this. You're watching the Rita Panahi Show. Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. Let's start, lefties, with this trans activist who seems to be upset about being asked to use the men's restroom in a hostel. And so this happens. The poor migrant female worker is followed and filmed. And then listen at the end where this poor woman is told, you have no idea what my social status is. I can ruin you.
About you telling me to use the men's bathroom, how would... I'm a girl. I'm a trans woman. How would it be if, you know, a woman actually went into the men's bathroom? How would it be? How would it be? Are you going to answer?
Yeah, I'm with you together. We'll go to reception, okay?
How would it be?
Yeah, I'm with you together. Go to reception,
Okay, let's go
okay?
reception.
Yeah. You're first coming, I'm after coming, okay?
No, go now.
Yeah.
Now.
I'll take something, okay?
Now.
Yeah, I'll work.
I'm a woman.
Yeah.
Don't be transphobic to me. You have no idea what sort of social status I have. I could ruin your whole reputation. I could ruin this whole hostel.
Now to another lefty losing it from Australia. This is an all-Australian edition, maybe a first. Now this one is from Mamma Mia. I don't know, something that miserable teal voting women must listen to. I certainly don't listen to it. I have no idea who this clown is, but she seems to think because Jermaine Greer has a different set of beliefs to her, because perhaps she believes in biology, that Jermaine must be crazy, or I don't know, maybe she has dementia.
I thought, if I had done that interview with Jermaine Greer, would I have published it? This is what worries me. We are in a world where we are living longer than ever, right? And that's a great thing. We are in a world where every single person has access to a microphone. What are the ethics?
Forever.
What are the ethics of someone as they get older? Maybe their memory is deteriorating. Maybe it is dementia. Maybe it's mental illness. We saw it with Kanye. What are the ethics around putting a microphone in front of someone and then pressing publish? And I thought, if I had done that interview with Jermaine Greer, would I have published it?
Listen, lady, you should worry about the unmitigated crap that you just spewed into a microphone. We are all dumber after hearing it. Joining me now is filmmaker and journalist Amy Horowitz. Amy, let's talk First Ladies. Melania Trump is teasing a comeback to the Trump campaign trail. This was her today when asked whether she was going to return and campaign with her husband.
Mrs. Trump, are you going to return to the campaign trail with your husband? Stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Two words there, Amy. Stay tuned. How much of a factor is Melania? We know Biden and Obama, they both relied heavily on their respective wives on the campaign trail.
Let me do the math here. Plus divided equals 0. I don't think it makes a difference. Who cares? I don't think it makes a difference at all. Yeah, she's standing by her man all she wants, but ultimately I think it's going to have no particular role in whether or not he wins or loses in this campaign. I think the poor lady's been through quite a bit as is. So if she sat on the sidelines, I wouldn't blame her. If she jumped in, I wouldn't blame her. But frankly, look, like we've talked before, this is coming down to economics. It's coming down to the border. It's coming down to the respective records. I think the spouses are going to have little to no effect on this race, to be totally honest.
Well, we keep hearing that Trump has a women problem and that Melania softens his image with women. So I don't know if it's going to change votes or if it's going to increase turnout. But move on to the media treatment of the president or future president, Donald Trump. The left-wing media, and that's the overwhelming majority of the media, has been extra demented this week over Trump's bloodbath comments, which we played in full on Monday. He was talking about a bloodbath in the car industry if he loses the election. But they presented that as a bloodbath in the streets. And they also lost it over his comments about MS-13 gangbangers coming into the country illegally. Again, we played the full clip on Monday, and you see in context is talking very clearly about MS-13 criminals, the worst of the worst. But the media claimed that Trump said migrants are not people, not MS-13, but all migrants. And Army, that this fake news was spread across so many publications, from the New York Times to Rolling Stone.
Yeah, no, it's another example of the hypocrisy of the media, of course. Yes, of course, we all knew that these were totally taken out of context, twisting his words. But the crazy thing is, look, they knew this. You cannot convince me that they didn't listen to the entire clip. They understood the full context. They went with it, Rita, because they always get away with it. They thought they can get away with it again. That's why they went forward with this. And now they were called out. They thought, hey, we can just portray this to the American people. They'll buy it. They won't look into it. And we got away with something. But in this case, they were called out, right? But the crazy thing is even after they were called out, even after people started acknowledging what the context was, they still began to twist themselves into logistical pretzels to say, well, but in the context of Trump, this is what he actually meant. Like, okay, yeah, he didn't say that in the speech, but I know what he was thinking. That's what they then shifted to. Now, the crazy thing is that they call out the political violence, real political violence, not rhetorical political violence, which this wasn't even the case. Did they do that with the BLM riot, which ended up with 20 people murdered and over $4 billion in damages? No, that was a mostly peaceful riot. Or the shootings at the congressional baseball game when the Bernie Sanders supporters shot up Republicans. No, of course not. But this is the hypocrisy and the double standard of the left and the media that carries the water of the Democratic Party. They thought they can get away with it. They were caught.
And on MS-13, for those who are not aware, I mean, they are the worst of the worst, brutal killers, drug pushers, and today, the New York Post is reporting that MS-13 members have been accused of sex trafficking underage girls and molesting children. So I'd call them subhuman as well. Now, let's go to the border crisis. Texas continues to do the job that the Biden administration should be doing, and they've just had a big win in the US Supreme Court, which has voted to let Texas state law enforcement arrest people suspected of illegally crossing the border. This is a big blow to the Biden administration who tried to block it. I don't understand here, Army, why they want to stop Texas trying to solve a problem that they created. This is a gift for the Biden White House.
Yeah, of course. Look, anytime the more immigration gets stopped, right, or illegal immigration gets stopped in the country, this is good for Biden, of course, perversely. But he is not smart enough to realize that. Yeah, this was actually very, very unexpected because prior courts in the past have held the states do not have a right to police the borders. That falls within the federal jurisdiction according to the Constitution. Now, look, I am a constitutionalist. I am a strict constructionalist. I don't like activist courts on either side, on the right or on the left. So, yes, while, of course, this was something that is going to be very helpful to stop this illegal flow coming to our country. And they use this novel claim of it was an invasion, and there is an invasion. The states do have a right to fight back against it. But look, I don't like judicial activism on either side. I do want it to follow the intent of the founders and the Constitution. And prior courts did find in favor of the federal government. Now, having said that, this really is a game changer because this will allow the state of Texas to arrest these people and then deport them. They'll actually have a choice. They can either go into the criminal court justice system and they'll be arrested and held there until their court case, or they can be deported. This is absolutely a game changer. This will be a major deterrent, and it was very, very unexpected. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. It's not over yet. It'll be interesting how this plays out going forward.
Army Horowitz, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
That's it from me tonight. Up next is News Night. I'll see you at 11 tomorrow. Good night.